Welcome back to Cheating Stories Hub. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate each one of you. Before we dive into today's compelling story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Now, let's get into this tale of betrayal, cunning strategy, and ultimate triumph. Adam, a returning Marine, discovers his seemingly perfect family life is a lie after his neighbor, Greg, reveals that Adam's wife, Jessica, has been hosting wild parties and seeing other men in his absence. Determined to uncover the truth, Adam installs hidden cameras, uncovering damning evidence of Jessica's betrayal and the presence of another man acting as daddy to his children. DNA tests reveal the ultimate heartbreak: the children are not his. In a gripping confrontation, Adam exposes Jessica's lies and takes legal action, gaining full custody and reclaiming his life. Jessica's downfall is swift, leaving Adam free to rebuild a future grounded in truth. The knock on the door startled me as I dropped my duffel bag onto the floor. Months at sea had left me worn, the familiar weight of my boots scuffing the hardwood floor as I froze mid-step. It wasn't Jessica's knock, too sharp, too urgent. When I opened the door, there stood Greg, my neighbor, his shoulders tense, his face a mixture of anger and pity. Greg had always been friendly, polite, but tonight his eyes burned with something else entirely. "I can't do this anymore, Adam," he blurted out, his voice low but firm. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the street like someone might be watching. "You deserve to know what's been happening while you've been gone." My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" I asked, gripping the doorframe. Greg shook his head, muttering under his breath. Then he straightened up, his gaze locking onto mine. "Your wife, Adam. Jessica. She's been throwing parties every weekend. Strangers coming and going. Loud music, broken bottles on the sidewalk. It's not just that, she's had men over. Different men. I've seen it with my own eyes." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. For him to laugh and say it was some misunderstanding. But Greg wasn't laughing. His fists clenched, his voice trembling as he added, "And the kids, Adam. Your kids, they're in the middle of it all." My mouth went dry. "Greg, if this is some kind of—" "It's not," he interrupted, shoving his phone into my hands. "Here. Look." I didn't want to, but my eyes dropped to the screen. Grainy footage recorded through Greg's window showed my living room. My couch. Jessica sprawled out with some guy, his arms slung casually around her shoulders, her head tilted back in laughter. Around them, a sea of people drank, danced, shouted. Trash littered the floor. My daughter's toy unicorn lay abandoned under the coffee table. I couldn't hear the sound, but I could feel the chaos pouring out of that screen like a toxic cloud. "That's not all," Greg said, his voice like gravel. "She's been letting the kids run wild while she's busy entertaining. I found your son crying on my porch one night. Said he didn't want to go back inside." He stopped, his hands balling into fists again. "I can't stand by anymore. You're a good man, Adam. You don't deserve this." For a second, the world tilted. I felt like I was still on the ship, waves rocking me side to side. My home, my sanctuary, had turned into something unrecognizable. I looked at Greg, his face etched with frustration and guilt, and I knew he was telling the truth. Before I could say a word, Greg leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You need to handle this. For yourself. For your kids. But whatever you do, don't let her know I told you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, the phone still clutched in my hand. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as a million questions flooded my mind. Who were those men? How long had this been going on? Why hadn't anyone else said anything? I stepped back inside, the door shutting behind me with a dull thud. The house felt colder, quieter than it should have. I stared at the walls, the furniture, the photos of Jessica and the kids smiling back at me from the mantel. It was all a lie, wasn't it? All of it. I had come home ready to be a husband, a father, a man proud of his family. Now I was left with nothing but Greg's words and that sickening video, both of them cutting into me like a blade. Somewhere upstairs, Jessica's voice rang out, calling for me, cheerful and sweet as ever. I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced myself to answer. The game had just begun, and she didn't even know the rules were about to change. I couldn't shake Greg's words as I stood in the hallway, Jessica's cheerful voice echoing down the stairs. For a moment, I considered storming up there, demanding answers, flipping the entire house upside down. But something stopped me. A voice in my head told me to wait. To think. If she was capable of all this under my nose, she'd have lies ready. I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside under the guise of getting some air. The night was heavy with a humid silence, almost oppressive. My boots crunched on the gravel driveway as I walked around the side of the house, my heart pounding like a war drum. It was strange. I'd lived here for years, yet tonight it felt foreign, like stepping into enemy territory. The faint smell of stale beer hit me first. It hung in the air like a bad memory, growing stronger as I approached the back patio. I crouched by the sliding glass door and peered inside. The place looked clean at first glance. Too clean. Almost like she'd gone out of her way to erase something. But under the glow of the dim kitchen light, there it was, a smashed beer bottle in the corner, shards glinting like tiny accusations. I moved closer, my shadow stretching across the deck. Through the living room window, I spotted more signs. Subtle, but damning. Scuff marks on the hardwood floor, the kind you get when a crowd of people doesn't care how they walk. A stack of mismatched Solo cups in the trash bin, barely concealed under a layer of crumpled paper towels. The kicker was the couch. A throw blanket was draped over it sloppily, as if someone had tried to cover a stain in a rush. My stomach churned. I stepped back, my breath shallow. The yard was dark except for the faint glow from the windows, but I noticed something near the tree line. A few cigarette butts scattered in the grass. Jessica didn't smoke. Neither did I. Squinting in the dim light, I spotted a half-empty bottle of whiskey nestled in the bushes. It wasn't ours. I leaned down, picked it up, and inspected the label. Expensive. Too expensive for Jessica to just leave lying around. It hit me then. These weren't just signs of a party. They were signs of ownership. As if someone else had claimed this space as their own. Someone who didn't belong here. The urge to storm back inside was almost overwhelming, but I clenched my fists and forced myself to breathe. I couldn't let her know I was on to her. Not yet. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about understanding the scope of what she'd done. I couldn't confront her without every piece of the puzzle. Not if I wanted the truth. I slipped the whiskey bottle into my jacket pocket and made my way back to the front door, my mind racing with possibilities. Why had Greg waited so long to tell me? Who were these people she let into our home? And most importantly, what else had been hidden from me? As I stepped inside, the smell of Jessica's perfume hit me. Too sweet and cloying. She was standing in the kitchen, her phone in one hand, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong. "Hey, where'd you go?" she asked, her voice light. "Just needed some fresh air," I said, forcing my tone to stay calm. My eyes scanned the room, noting how she leaned casually against the counter. The same spot where Greg's video had shown a stranger just nights ago. I clenched my jaw and smiled back. "Did you miss me?" she teased, stepping closer, completely unaware that the game had already begun. "Not yet, Jessica," I thought to myself. Not yet. The days that followed were a blur of feigned normalcy. Each morning, I plastered on a smile, responding to Jessica's casual questions and the kids' excited chatter about their day. Inside, I was a storm of anger, betrayal, and cold calculation. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed to see everything. Late one night, as Jessica slept soundly beside me, I reached out to Mike, an old Marine buddy who now owned a security company. When I explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line before he replied, "You'll have everything you need by tomorrow." By the following evening, a network of hidden cameras had been discreetly installed throughout the house. Living room, kitchen, hallways, even the backyard, there wasn't a blind spot in sight. Mike had ensured the devices were untraceable, tiny lenses tucked into vents, light fixtures, and decorative objects. Jessica suspected nothing as I spent the evening fixing things around the house. Through my phone, I had access to live feeds and recordings. Initially, the footage was uneventful. Jessica went about her day, cooking, helping the kids with homework, and scrolling through her phone. But beneath the mundane surface, I saw signs that the facade wouldn't last. She seemed jumpy, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. 2 nights later, my suspicions were confirmed.
It was just past 10 p.m. when the first visitor arrived. Headlights flashed through the living room window as Jessica, seated on the couch, jumped up. She smoothed her hair and glanced at herself in the hallway mirror, her body language suddenly alive with anticipation. When she opened the door, a tall man with a confident smile stood there, holding a bottle of wine. They exchanged a few words before she stepped aside to let him in. My chest tightened as I watched the scene unfold. The man poured 2 glasses of wine and sat close to Jessica on the couch. Their laughter echoed faintly through the camera's audio feed, each shared glance and subtle touch twisting the knife in my chest. Her hand lingered on his arm, his fingers brushed her knee. I fast-forwarded through the footage, unable to stomach it in real time. The night ended with him leaving just before dawn. Jessica lingered by the door after he'd gone, staring into the empty street as if reluctant to return to her life inside. When she finally locked the door and headed upstairs, I rewound the footage and watched it again. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was routine. Over the next week, I meticulously documented everything. Jessica's demeanor changed when the kids went to bed. Her smiles became brighter, her movements more deliberate, as if she were waiting for something or someone. I noted every visitor, every interaction, and every betrayal. The house I thought was mine had become a stage for Jessica's double life. The turning point came one Saturday morning.
Brad.
I recognized him immediately. He lived 2 streets over, a familiar face at block parties and school events. We weren't friends, but we'd exchanged pleasantries in passing. Seeing him step into my home, grinning like he owned the place, sent a surge of cold fury through me. The camera footage from that day was a grotesque parody of a happy family morning. Brad sat at the kitchen table, casually sipping coffee as Jessica cooked breakfast. My son ran up to him, calling him Daddy, while my daughter showed him a crayon drawing with wide-eyed excitement. Brad ruffled my son's hair and smiled as though this was his home, his family. Jessica's face was illuminated with a warm smile, a smile I'd once believed was reserved for me. My hands trembled as I saved the footage. It wasn't just Jessica's betrayal anymore. It was the way she'd allowed someone else to step into my role, to take my place in my children's lives. I waited until Brad left before making my next move. Jessica was out in the backyard with the kids, her laughter ringing out like nothing was wrong. I slipped upstairs and retrieved my son's toothbrush and a few strands of my daughter's hair from her hairbrush. I sealed the samples in a plastic bag and headed out, telling Jessica I had errands to run. At the lab, I handed over the samples and paid extra for expedited results. "How soon can I get them?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. 3 to 5 business days, the technician replied, handing me a receipt. The wait was excruciating. Each day dragged on as I continued to play the role of the oblivious husband, documenting every betrayal while pretending not to notice the growing cracks in Jessica's facade. By the time the lab called with the results, I felt like a bomb ready to explode. "Mr. Carter, the results are ready," the technician said, her voice clinical. "Neither child shares your DNA." The words hit me like a freight train. My mind reeled, the truth crashing over me in relentless waves. I'd spent years believing these children were mine. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of pride and joy, all of it had been built on a lie. When I returned home that evening, Jessica greeted me with her usual bright smile. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light. "Fine," I replied, forcing my voice to remain calm. "We'll talk tomorrow." Her smile faltered, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Talk about what?" "Tomorrow," I repeated, my tone firm. "Not tonight."
That night, as I lay awake beside her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans for what was to come. Jessica didn't know it yet, but the game was over. Tomorrow, I'd confront her with the footage, the DNA results, and every piece of evidence I'd gathered. She'd built a house of lies, but now it was time for it to come crashing down. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting long shadows across the dining table where I sat, evidence spread out before me. A stack of printed photos, the damning DNA results, and the flash drive holding hours of incriminating footage rested in neat piles. My chest felt like it was in a vice, but my resolve was unshaken. Today was the day. Jessica walked into the room, her steps light and carefree. She was humming, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing the same bright smile she always had when the day began. That smile, once comforting, now felt like an insult. She stopped mid-stride when she saw me, her gaze falling on the papers in front of me. "Good morning," she said cautiously, her tone measured. "What's all this?" "Sit down," I replied, my voice calm but firm. I leaned back in my chair, forcing my hands to stay steady on the armrests. Her brow furrowed as she slowly pulled out a chair. "Adam, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with faux innocence. I slid the DNA results toward her. "Start here," I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. Jessica hesitated before picking up the paper. Her face remained neutral at first, but as her eyes scanned the words, the blood drained from her face. She glanced up at me, then back down at the page. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking slightly. "The truth," I said coldly. "You've been lying to me for years, Jessica. This proves it." Her hand shook as she set the paper down. You had no right to do this," she stammered. "You've been spying on me?" I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the table. "Don't deflect. We both know what's been happening while I've been gone. The lies, the parties, the strangers. I've seen everything." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I reached for the flash drive and held it up. "This holds hours of footage, Jessica. I've documented everything. The men you let into our home, into my children's lives. Care to explain?" Her composure cracked. "Adam, /n/n, don't," I interrupted, my voice cutting through hers like a blade. "You don't get to explain. Not after letting them call Brad Daddy. Not after what you've done to me and this family." Jessica's head dropped into her hands, and she began to sob. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "I was lonely. I needed something. You were always gone, Adam. It was like I was raising the kids on my own." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, the weight of her justification sinking into the room. "You needed something?" I said, my voice trembling with controlled anger. "You chose this. You didn't stumble into it by accident. You made decisions, one after another, to betray me and turn our lives into this mess." Her sobs grew louder, but they didn't move me. "Not anymore. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, standing up and towering over her. You'll be hearing from them soon. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Adam, please. This is our home. I don't have anywhere to go. Not anymore, I replied, my voice steady. You forfeited that right the moment you let another man into this house. Jessica stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and desperation. What about the kids? They need their mother. You can't do this to them. I'm not doing anything to them, I said, my voice firm. You did this. You brought strangers into their lives, into our home. You made this bed, Jessica. Now you have to lie in it. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her at the table, sobbing into her hands. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and difficult conversations. The court proceedings were swift, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had collected. My lawyer presented the DNA results, the video footage, and detailed logs of Jessica's behavior. It was undeniable. Jessica fought to keep the house and maintain custody of the kids, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and ownership of the house. Jessica was allowed visitation rights but only under strict supervision. The day she left was somber. I stood in the doorway as she packed the last of her belongings into her car. She avoided meeting my gaze, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her defeat. The kids watched from the living room window, their faces pressed against the glass. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew things were changing. As Jessica climbed into the driver's seat, she finally looked at me. I'm sorry, she said softly. For everything. I didn't respond. I watched as she pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. The weight of her departure felt heavy, but it was a different kind of weight, one I knew would lift with time. Life after Jessica's departure was an adjustment, but it was a welcome one. The house felt quieter, more peaceful. I poured my energy into rebuilding a sense of normalcy for the kids. We established new routines, filled the days with laughter and activities, and slowly began to heal. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, a sense of peace washed over me. The lies and betrayals that had haunted me for so long were behind me. The future stretched out ahead, filled with possibility. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new, something real.